Hello, I'm Simon Croom and I'm the Executive Director of the Supply Chain Management Institute here at the University of San Diego. And I have with me Professor Andrew Cox, who's a visiting professor at the Supply Chain Management Institute. Dr. Cox was previously the Director for the Centre for Business Strategy and Procurement at the University of Birmingham Business School and set up the first MBA in Strategic Procurement in Europe. Andrew, welcome. One of the things that we're often getting our students and others to address is this whole issue about partnership, and for one of the many things you're renowned for is being the person who challenged this whole notion of partnership. I'd be really interested to hear about your thinking and your perspective on that whole debate.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me, and can I just say, the first thing I should say is that I'm not against collaboration between buyers and sellers. I feel I've had a bad press. Many years ago, I'm trained as an economist, I went to a conference. That's how I got into purchasing and supply chain management, and a consultancy was talking about you should stop being adversarial and you should be more collaborative, and this was best practice and world-class performance for buyers. And I was a bit astounded because it was a false dichotomy. And what I mean by that is the opposite of collaboration isn't adversarial. The opposite of adversarial isn't collaboration. Adversarial refers to the way in which people engage commercially in exchange. And you can be adversarial or non-adversarial. Collaboration refers to the operational way you manage a relationship between a buyer and seller. And the opposite of collaboration is to be arm's length. So I felt that there was some misunderstanding, theoretically, about the ways in which people could work together.
Okay.
And so my view has always been that people were misunderstanding what the logic of business strategy is and how procurement people and sellers, marketing people, have a fundamental tension in their relationship. Collaboration is something that all human beings at certain times have to do because it's the best form of survival or the best way of achieving your ends or goals. So when people act in organizations as buyers or sellers or as individuals, sometimes you should collaborate and sometimes you should be arm's length. My concern, and why I think I've had a bad press, was that people were being told by self-interested consultancies and by people who hadn't thought through, in my view, in the academic community, properly enough and sufficient rigor, good practice and good theoretical practice, selling things that weren't really getting to grips with what's the methodology you need to understand when it's appropriate to collaborate. So at Birmingham we established a task which was to say, can you go back to first principles and ask yourself this question: under what circumstances is it appropriate to do anything? Now, what's the methodology for doing that? Our view was, between buyers and sellers, there are resources that allow buyers to achieve and maximize their goals, and there are resources that allow suppliers to achieve and maximize their goals. And that there's a fundamental tension between the objective ideal goals of buyers and sellers. I haven't time today to go into that. We've written quite a lot about that. You have to have a methodology that allows you to understand the power and leverage position that buyers and or sellers have when they interact together in exchange relationships. Now, we developed a 4-box matrix that looks at this: buyer dominance, supplier dominance, interdependence, and independence. And we've developed over the years a methodology that gives us over 100 variables that you need to look at to understand where you position in this power position between buyers and sellers. If you know where you are in this power matrix, you will understand that if you're in interdependent circumstances, what Williamson might call situations of bilateral dependency, where both parties operationally need one another and the switching costs between the two parties are so high, moving to leverage the market through competition and short-term contracts on an arm's length basis doesn't give you the advantages that you would get from working closely together, then it makes sense for you to indulge in, let's not call it partnerships, because that has a particular legal meaning in some countries. It makes sense to collaborate. There are other circumstances when you might collaborate. For example, if you were a dominant buyer, you might decide that rather than test the market, you would get more benefit from working and creating a dependency. So many of the supermarkets, the Walmarts and the like, use vendor-managed inventory systems, which essentially are about buyer-dominant situations that create hold-up situations where willing supplicant suppliers are controlled by a dominant buyer. This is a form of collaboration, and for some suppliers, although not all, it's the best deal in town, and they're going to accept it. If you're in an interdependent power situation, then the way you would collaborate is different, because you would need to share value more. So there are different ways of thinking about collaboration, or if you prefer partnership. You could also collaborate in the situations of supplier dominance, and we've seen examples and evidence where buyers have got some advantages from collaborating with suppliers who are willing to allow them to collaborate, but they don't always get much commercial value from this, but they may get operational benefits. So one of the things that we were trying to do, and we're not saying we're the only people that have thought about these issues, was to say there will be circumstances when you can collaborate, but the way in which you will collaborate and whether you should or you shouldn't will depend on the circumstances you're in. And our experience of working with companies around the world, in the US and in Europe and in Asia, is there's a tremendous amount of wasted time and effort because too many people think all they have to do is talk the language of collaboration or partnership without understanding that there are specific modalities or ways of working that are appropriate under particular power circumstances.
And it's that whole issue of appropriateness that's at the heart of your line of argument. It's not a sort of promotion of collaboration or a promotion of arm's length.
Well, let's just stay with that, with your question, which I think is a really good one. I've talked to you about collaboration and partnering because that's what you asked me about. Our view, in the research that I've done and in my own consultancy work with my consultancy group, is that the time and resource required for buyers and sellers to fully collaborate properly means that there will be very few circumstances out of the hundreds of supplier relationships that buyers have or sellers have with customers in which collaboration will be the ideal choice. In fact, all of the research that we've done, all of the practical work we've done in consulting demonstrates that most buyers use the standard 3 bids and a buy with the usual suspects because they're not properly resourced, nor are the power circumstances conducive to allow them to create the incentive structures to allow collaboration to work. So that if you took 100% of most companies who buy, the scope for proper collaboration, and there are different forms of collaboration, full and partial collaboration. You can collaborate at the first tier of the supply chain and you can go down the supply chain. So this is quite a complex subject. We think it would be no more than 5 to 10% of the total category activities of most organizations. It's not where most of the activity is going to be. Now, that doesn't mean it won't be by value tremendously beneficial. But our experience is that people often do it without understanding that what they're trying to do is not appropriate. They don't understand the methodologies that are required, the competence developments that are required on both sides. And this is a really, really important point. Our experience has been you can't deal with supplier performance management or collaboration post-contractually. If you haven't understood what you should be doing pre-contractually, and negotiated this as part of the terms and conditions of the contract and agreed in writing what it is that you expect both parties to do, you're going to have serious problems post-contractually with suppliers. Most of the experience we've seen is this is done really badly. 2 reasons. People haven't thought through what they're doing properly, and they just assume that because somebody's done it in the auto industry, everybody else can do it without understanding the circumstances, why it was appropriate, and the power circumstances that were conducive.
Thanks, Andrew. I think that really underlines, right from the start you said, asking the right questions is the way to go forward rather than looking at an answer and hoping that it fits your problem.
Absolutely correct.
But Andrew, thank you very much.
Pleasure.